Hi, I'm Ed. I'm a GP from Sutton Coldfield. I have a comment and a question. First of all, I just wanted to thank the guys sitting up there for taking the time to drive this forward. Thanks. The question is about practices. Practices may be members of this provider group, maybe members of federation, and it may be corporate partners too in this big partnership. I hear reassuring voices that you'll be working collaboratively together, but actually there are potential conflicts, aren't there? Practice and indeed board members. These organisations can actually be bidding against each other for contracts. So how do you manage these real conflicts?
Just on the point of bidding for contracts, there is something that one needs to know about contracts generally, and that is to bid for some of the NHS contracts, the ones we've been talking about earlier, you have to have commercial CQC, commercial IG stock. You have to have invested the sort of money that is being talked about this evening. So don't just lower it to, okay, there's a large organisation that can go bid. It has to be bid ready. And in some cases, it is actually a prerequisite that the organisation is incorporated as some kind of limited company. With that, I'm seeing quite a lot of from a commercial point of view. But Vish, are you going to be competing for contracts? Is that the issue?
I think there are times where there may be conflicts, but I think we have preempted that by wanting to work together from the beginning, to have a shared vision of how primary care is across the city, and to delineate our roles really. And there may be some things as a corporate partnership that we would want to bid for that isn't in the interest of the rest of the practices that sit within the provider group.
There wouldn't be high-risk money things, would they? Because you wouldn't want to take that risk back into your partnership.
No, and that's exactly why we use the provider group as a vehicle to bid for it, for just a corporate partnership on its own. Or it may turn out to be for the benefit of the other practices. But I think having close collaboration, links, board representation is the way to navigate through that. And there may be times where it's tested.
You mentioned something else, though, about potential conflicts around sort of directors and things, for example, as well, board members. Actually, would that provide you with an issue, or could you actually even share critical functions?
I think that we see some potential conflicts as potential opportunities for collaboration. I think sitting up here we have members of people that have practices within the corporate partnership in formation. I think that is to our collectively to primary care in Birmingham's credit really. I think we very much view these as intertwined and interlinked situations.
So could you serve in one as an officer and in the other as a director? Unlike, say, a CCG where you couldn't. Could you do that?
Each organisation will have its own governance, and the governance of those organisations will dictate who is precluded from sitting in those roles. But on the face of it, I don't see why that can't happen, should it be something that people have voted to do.
Okay. Roger, if people voted to have an individual on who happened to be an officer in the super partnership or one of the federations, is that a conflict for you?
No, I don't think there will be a conflict with that. Obviously with the CCG and the provider, yes, because one's commissioning and the other's providing.
Yeah.
I don't think...
But if it was the super partnership or the emerging...
No. And I certainly think at times there may be ideas that the super partnership comes up with and they want to do a bid for something, the provider company may help them to bid for that. So, I really see it as a collaborative working. I think the main thing to do is not to split up primary care into various small fractions. I think we have our strength by being together, and if we're all together in a large provider company, that gives us immense strength.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, hopefully that laid some of those fears to rest, and I shall just pop into the table here. I've got where my microphone is, and if he is rushing towards you. Just while that's happening, I'm very pleased to say we've managed to get rid of the blue lights that replaced the white lights, so things are looking a little better up here at this moment in time. But we are still on track to finish at 9, okay?
Thank you very much. Nigel Speak, Man of Practice, Sutton Coldfield. I came here with quite an open mind, and I must admit I'm quite excited by the prospects. I think the concept is a very good one, although I do have my reservations because history tells us that the NHS screws down the price, and things that we think may be profitable may turn out not to be. my observation that the AQP for anti-coagulation, big providers didn't even tender, is perhaps one sort of example of that. And I know the NHS is looking to get everything for the lowest possible price. My question is related to the shares. Obviously, the existing partners in the practices will make this investment. Who owns the shares? Will they be owned by individual existing partners, or will they be an asset of the practice itself? What happens when partners then retire and they recruit new doctors? Will the new doctors not have a vested interest in this?
Okay, but really sound questions on, actually it's that ownership thing, transferability, all that.
Thank you. Back to the point I said previously, the practice cannot own the share. So the partnership need to nominate one partner to hold, it could be an employee, but generally a partner, to hold a share. Now, as part of the documents, we draft a deed of trust. What that deed of trust is, the partners in the partnership say, we are appointing Dr. A to be our nominee to hold the shares on our behalf. And the company then only needs to look to that person for voting, etc. Now, the partnership can change that nominee at any time by writing to the company and say, it's not Dr. A, it's Dr. Y now. So we need an individual to hold the shares. Now, we also put a clause in that agreement that is optional, but what the clause says is the partners as between themselves regard the share as a partnership asset. Now, the rationale for that is, because we've had questions at the outset when we were setting up, we were saying, okay, is the share a partnership asset, or is it an individual asset? And do we need to change our partnership agreements? So lovely, I'd love to get all your partnership agreements and charges to amend them, but the reason we put that into the deed of trust, I wouldn't, I really thought is to avoid that happening. Because if you follow the logic, if you agree, and you don't need to, but if you agree that the share is a partnership asset, you then turn to your accountant and say, there's a partnership asset here. You might have a discussion with your accountant and say, let's value it at market value, let's value it at nil, because we don't want to attribute that, let's value it. Then the value as a partnership asset goes into the capital account of the partners. If a partner retires, he or she is entitled to their capital account, will include an allocation of the share. And then you can decide for partners coming in whether they get a share of that. And they probably will. If it's a partnership asset, they might have a lockstep where they build up to a full share. So that's the way that we do it. If there was a practice, and I haven't come across one, there was a question about this, but I don't think anyone's actually done it. If you wanted the shares to be personal assets, in the same way as you might hold property, and say, well actually, this is the four of us that own this property, it's not going to be a full partnership asset, you can have a separate document between the four of you saying, we hold this share personally, it's not a partnership asset, and this is how we will deal with it, and if I retire, you've got to pay the value of it. So you could deal with it as a personal asset, but part of the document we provide is to say that it's held by a nominee, that person is the shareholder as far as the company is concerned, but as far as the practice is concerned, it's a partnership asset.
Just, is that reasonable clarification on that issue, particularly with the exit strategy in mind that some may have in the room?
Well, the answer seems to be it's flexible. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yes, the company needs to identify a shareholder, and the company really only wants to be looking to one shareholder. So, for example, it doesn't want to get into a partnership dispute. There's five partners or six partners, three saying vote this way, three saying vote that way. The company doesn't want to get into that. But it allows the partnership to devise whatever arrangement it wishes regarding the holding of that share, the value of that share, how that's taken into their own capital accounts, how you decide how the votes are going to be cast. So you decide amongst yourselves how you're going to tell the nominee shareholder how to vote.
So the company does not interfere with practice business?
No, definitely not. And we all, there's two sides. We won't interfere, but we don't want to get caught up. So if you tell partners to go and vote a certain way and the partner goes and votes against that, they've breached their duties. So I think that.
Okay, I'm going to move us on. I've got quite a few questions to go, so I'm going to get briefer on the answers, but that doesn't imply you waffled, I assure you. Let me just get to yourself and then over here.
It's really a very short one. It's a technical query. The initial 40p subscription would buy you an A share for the practice.
Right. Quick, give me the answer, technical team down here. I guess I go to the finance end.
Okay, this is going to be a quick answer. No, the 40p buys you B shares, and the number of B shares you need is directly proportional to your list size.
And
A share is your voting share. And that would be one per practice regardless of the size of the practice.
Okay, and of course, I think you're looking at the A share being the same price as a B share, but there'd just be many more B shares, I think that was the point. So that seems a reasonable recipe here, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. And I will talk to the board about this idea about repayment. There's ways you can structure the repayment by having nominal amounts of shares and then a loan to get a loan repaid. Because if you pay for your share capital, it's locked in. So one of the things I'll raise with the board, the steering group, is okay, you might want to put a smaller amount in for B shares, but keep the proportions the same, so that you have 10% of the list size, you get 10% of the B shares, but some of the money goes in by way of loan, because the loans are repayable. So there's an element around that. So
At reasonable interest as well.
you can have interest as well. So I think it's not something that we've got into because it's just a stage of time. There's a mechanism to return the initial capital that isn't always by pure loan.
Okay.
It's hard for a company to buy back its shares.
Thank you. Okay, assuming the shares stay the way they are, we'll stay with that proposition for a second. The board will be tasked to look at options at this stage anyway, if you decide to take this a little further forward. I'm going to yourself, and then I'm going to whiz around over that side of the room.
I've got a question about allocating delivery of services. Say the company has bid for minor surgery, offering minor surgery. Say if I'm a single-handed practice, I perform minor surgery, I want to deliver that. My friend down the road has a 20,000 patient practice. He wants to deliver minor surgery, and he can actually do it cheaper than I can do it. How are you going to allocate that? Are we going to go to an A vote? Because if it comes to that, I've got just as much vote as he has.
Okay.
And and the fact that he can deliver it cheaper, as a company, the responsibility to the shareholders would be to deliver it in that fashion at the cheaper mode at my expense and bringing less income into me. How are you going to resolve that conflict?
I think you're surely not going to have differential pricing amongst practices, are you? That would be absurd, wouldn't it?
No, we're not. Similar to how you have the Lizzie's, or what was the Leslie's and the Jessies now, we'd put an SLA together and it'll be one set price, so every practice will be treated the same.
Because otherwise you're going to have carnage out
Otherwise,
there. Yeah, okay, that's a fairly straightforward answer. I think.
Isn't the whole principle of pooling resources to be able to do things cheaper than our competitors? So by divvying it out to smaller units, you're actually going against that, because that's going to inevitably raise that price that you're assigning. Whereas if we go with the bigger providers, you'd be able to lower that price.
I think you may have misunderstood NHS contracting. Hang on a sec.
No, I was just going to say, but this is about sustaining primary care. So to have an option with the practices would be daft. As you say, to put out, this is the model we can deliver it at this price. We're offering you to provide at that price. Who wants to provide? You then have the efficiencies between your practices that another practice may be able to make slightly more profit for themselves out of that amount than you can, but that again is not interfering with the way you run your practice. If you want an extra practice manager, an extra practice nurse, that's up to you, but it shouldn't be. You would just destroy all
I know you're making the assumption that the competitors won't be able to undercut you.
But that's in the bid itself. Now,
Exactly, so the bid that you put forward to bid for a service has to take into account these factors of the fact that if you're pooling practices and resources together, that's what brings the price down. And there's no reason why your competitors can't offer large-scale competition on those tariffs. So
yes.
What sort of projections have you got for these sort of services? These are the sort of hard facts that people
Can I just also remind you that an awful lot of the services are fixed tariff anyway. But actually, it's the value added you bring in, not the price differential. And I have to make that point. If it becomes a price point issue, then you've got to task your board. And I'm not saying these are the board, but whichever board you ultimately select and elect, to make sound commercial judgments. In the way that, Karen, I don't know how many contracts you've won yet. How long have you been going?
Since June last year.
Okay, and has price been a differential? How many contracts have you won?
Every time we've put out to practices, they've all been paid exactly the same price, no matter what their size are. As Ross says,
So whatever the size of the contract, you paid the same. How many contracts have you won?
we're now
3. Okay,
How many have you lost?
okay, that's not a bad strike rate. They reckon commercially you win 1 in every 3. That's actually not a bad strike rate. Okay,
I just wanted to say one thing in response to that. This is one of the reasons why we think this is such a necessary and exciting prospect. We're talking about being GP providers who are bidding. We have the list of patients. We already know we can do these things, and it's not just about the cost. It's also about the quality and the governance. And that's why we will be extremely competitive when it comes to bidding for some of these services.
Alex, isn't it true to say, and I think this is something from other provider companies, I think it's worthy of our consideration, that when you've got a strong, vibrant network of GP practices, 30 plus, in this case, potentially even 90 plus, maybe even 100 plus, that actually, if you're an external organisation, how do you match that distribution centre? How do you match all those potential service delivery centres, to use the commercial jargon? And actually, a lot of companies deselect themselves when a GP provider organisation has been formed. That's particularly true, I think, we've seen that. Commercial organisations go, I've been at a conference recently, but the first question commercial companies asked me was, where's the map of where people haven't formed? Because actually they know it's harder to land with, and harder to match you, not on the price issue. Actually, it's hard to match you on what Alex just said. It's the standard of general practice, the sheer number of general practices. For them to build that number of locations actually would virtually be impossible, I would suggest, across Birmingham.